Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast, and join us on an exploration of the healing wisdom of flowers.
With combined decades of experience in the study and practice of flower essence therapy, I, Kathleen Aspens, and co-host Rokana Feld guide you to reconnect to nature with these potent vibrational remedies.
Grief is a natural process and not a disorder or an illness to be treated. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual reaction to change, which involves losing something in life. Moving, changing jobs, ending a relationship, and especially the death of a loved one are common causes of grief. Flower Essence Therapy seeks to meet a person where they are on their journey and match that person with essences to support their unique situation. Hey, Kathleen, great to be with you again. What are some essences that you like to use supporting someone on their journey with grief?
Hi, Ro. It is nice to be here again, and I'm always enjoying spending time with you. You know, grief is such an interesting topic because it is a natural part of life, like you were saying. And I think that if we look at essences, maybe from the perspective of helping us process grief and helping us move through grief, that's kind of the approach that I try to take with clients and talking to them about my view on grief and it being something that we work our way through. And then we have all these emotions that we need to sort of work through as we go, rather than that there's an essence that can suppress or sort of kind of help you without experiencing it. Do you think that that's kind of a different perspective? I think that our culture really is not grief literate in the least. And we tend to think that grief is this discrete thing that happens for about a week or two, maybe, that, you know, once the funeral's over, really you should be like back to normal. What do you think?
Absolutely. You know, nobody really wants to talk about it. And it's very challenging for the person going through it because it's not supported by society, especially if it goes on much longer than, as you say, a couple weeks or so. And one thing that I've been reading books by Dr. Alan Wolfelt lately, and he wrote Understanding Grief and Journey into Grief. And I really love his writings on this. He talks a lot about, rather than treating, as a psychologist, companioning that person and what they're going through. And he has something called the 6 needs of mourning that are: accept the reality of the death, let yourself feel the pain of the loss, remember the person who died, develop a new self-identity, search for meaning, and let others help you. So this is such a more gentle, supportive, nurturing way to walk through this journey. And I feel that flower essences are a perfect way to kind of match those needs, rather than it being steps or phases or anything like that.
Oh yeah, I like that approach. I haven't read that work. It sounds really, really interesting, and you know, both of us have been walking a grief journey and really experiencing it deeply from the inside, which I think informs our work and can help us with others who are also experiencing it. You know, it's just been, you know, I think that learning a little bit more about the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, she never intended those to be linear stages.
Exactly.
It was more just like segments of grief. But I think that it sort of got turned into, well, now I'm in this phase, and then next I'll be moving on to that phase. And it's such an organic process, and it sort of just loops around and kind of in each season and each segment of your grieving process, you're going to revisit things. And so having essences to help support you can be an incredible help, and to sort of give you a container for that grief rather than making it go away. And I think that I like that companioning concept.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great word. And I'll just tell the listeners, I recently, 6 months ago, lost my father, and Kathleen graciously offered to make me a custom essence. So, the process of flower essence therapy, it was great to have that support. Even though I do this for other people, it's almost impossible to really do it for yourself in an objective way. So having a support system and letting people help you is such a big part of the process. And I'll just thank you again, Kathleen, for that support, because it was so helpful at that time.
Well, it was my pleasure to be able to offer that to you. And it's really just, I was paying it forward, because when I lost my mother, coming on 5 years now, a practitioner offered to me in the same way. And I think that it is one of those things that we, when we're in that place, we often have a hard time reaching out for help because we're just so deep into it. But to the degree you can, I'd really recommend for everyone to just ask for help and find an ally. And oftentimes you'll really get to know your friends in a new way. And those who have had grief experiences are going to be really helpful to you. And those who haven't had them yet are oftentimes not really going to be able to understand what you're going through.
So true. It's just so true. Yeah.
So, for anybody who's listening, who's experiencing grief, and that it runs this huge gamut. We're talking about the grief of a parent, but certainly the loss of a person in our life is a huge loss. But there are many, many other losses that take place in our lives, from moving or changing jobs, or changing schools. All of these things are grief experiences as well. And thank goodness we have the essences to help us support.
Yeah. And when you lose a person, depending on the role that they had in your life, that experience is very different for everyone. It's different for all the people that lost that same person. Each person has a different experience. And then depending on who they were in your life, that can really impact your identity in different ways. And so I like flower essences to assist with those pieces too. If losing someone that maybe you were in a relationship or married to for decades and relied on and don't know how to do various things without them, that's a whole piece of it. That's in addition to the grief that person is trying to navigate. Concepts of identity and self-confidence, etc., all can come up in there in different ways. If losing a father, that can have some different aspects than, for example, losing a mother. So it's all related, but it can impact us in ways that I think the flower essences, different flower essences, can assist in these specific, unique combinations of experience.
Right. And I think that this might be a good time to introduce what I considered like the grief first aid formula, which is grief relief from the Flower Essence Society. And I know that I recommend that a lot, especially in that initial phase where it's as much as shock as anything else. And I think that a rescue or first aid kind of formula is extraordinarily helpful to help kind of stabilize someone. And then, then there might be a time when they need something more specific or tailored. But it's really good to know that it exists and that it's available. Is grief relief one that you use a lot too?
I do love it. It has all the key elements for grief, and it comes in a convenient spray for people. I do like that a lot. Well, and there's some great formulas. Alaskan has Soul Support and Calling All Angels that I use. And then FES, have you tried the benediction oil?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I just gave a bottle of that to a friend whose mother was in the hospital, and the whole family. There was just so much going on, and I just said, "Here, just take this, and everyone put it on your heart, and it will help you." It gives you this container to kind of hold your heart as you go through something really difficult and painful. And also, I kind of like it just in general. I just love to use it when I'm feeling I need a little more support.
Absolutely. I recommend it all the time. And the fact that it's got that rosy smell, a beautiful scent, and that you can just apply it to the heart, right to the heart. It really gets in there and gives people a loving container on their body.
Yes.
So yeah, I just absolutely, I had only just discovered that last November, and it helped me immensely.
Yeah. And I think maybe we could explain that. So the grief relief formula is a flower essence formula that is available from the Flower Essence Society, and it's a combination formula blend with a number of different essences in it. And I think they also add a little bit of essential oil. I forget what the essential oil is. So it has a little bit of a flavor. I think it's minty. Is that right?
Lemon balm.
Lemon balm. Okay.
Yeah, I believe.
And so it's not a pure true flower essence, so it has a little bit of a smell and taste, and so that's a formulation. And then this benediction oil is a topical use oil, which is infused with some essential oils, and it's also infused with the flower essences. So it's a different way of using flower essences that allows you to use it topically, and it's quite easy to understand for someone because it smells good and it feels good, and it's a nice bridge for using some essences in that formula.
Yeah, thanks for that. But speaking of roses, I mean they're so key in supportive formulas, especially for grief and for the heart chakra. And I know that you have some very special roses in your collection. You want to talk about some of those?
Absolutely. Since we started on the topic of the heart, I think that's a good place to start, as good as anywhere, because all of the roses resonate with the heart chakra and the heart area. And so they're all a lot of different roses. Use whatever you've got in your collection. If you have any at home on hand, like using the wild rose from Box Essences, it's an amazing essence. And so I would just reach for that. You use what you have available, and then you can get something else. But if you've got something that's a rose, well, try that and see how that can help you. I really think that the essences have a way, there's an intelligence there, so they can really meet you where you are and help you in what you're asking for. So just because you might have an essence on hand that doesn't specify your issue, you can ask for help, and they can do a lot more than what sort of their description might say. But one of the essences that I've made in my Flora of Asia collection is the Soul's Rose. And the Soul's Rose is so helpful for the grief experience. It's really aligned with the grief experience and of having loss, and helping you to be able to get to the place where you can kind of find the love within that loss instead of the pain of the loss. So it helps to kind of soothe it. It's got this really lovely, in the presence of the plant, it has this incredible warm and fragrant presence, but it holds you in this place of remembering the good parts, remembering the love that you have for the person, the situation, and helping to sort of soothe that hurt and allowing it to flow.
That's beautiful. Love that.
Yeah. And I know you have some roses too that you're friends with.
I made friends with with a few. The sweetbriar rose is one of my favorites. It's also called eglantine. And it's very, very similar to the California wild rose. It's sweet smelling. It smells like kind of like apples when you rub the leaves. And it is a real strong heart medicine. It acts on emotional, spiritual, and physical imbalances of the heart chakra as well. It works with pain of heartache by promoting and mending like the rebuilding of that area and instilling a strong sense of self-love. So anytime I think that self-love, I mean, of course, all the roses help with that, but the wild rose and the sweetbriar rose, I really like to use to remind someone about loving themselves and to just have that softness of attitude towards themselves. And I I think that it helps us find strength by realizing that love is the strongest power in the world and always present in our lives.
That's really beautiful. When you were talking about that rebuilding process, that's when I started thinking about, now I'd be thinking about the fireweeds because they are really helpful for that rebuilding, and much more specifically, river beauty, which is a type of fireweed. And this is from the Alaskan Essences. And river beauty is just, it grows along the banks of rivers and grows in areas that have been sort of washed out. When from the cycle of the year, the riverbanks tend to change quite a bit, and the river beauty is one that can come in and kind of colonize an area that's been sort of washed out or changed, altered significantly by the flow of the water. And river beauty as an essence is helpful for whenever there's just been this overwhelm of emotion in whatever way. And in this case, it would be an overwhelm of grief, of some sort of really dreadful experience that's happened to you. And you're just trying to find a way to kind of rebuild after that or process that experience. And river beauty can really like target in on that very specific situation.
That's a great visual. I mean, that thought of a flood or washing away the banks of a river, and water, really represents emotion and floods of emotion and overwhelming of emotion, which happens, absolutely happens in a grief situation. So I love that idea of those flowers coming up and repairing those banks. That's great.
Yeah, when I think about flower essence therapy, I'm thinking more in the term, along these terms because of my background as a horticulturist, these terms of ecology. And I think that if we see ourselves as ecologies and we look at our lives as being an ecological reclamation project, that we can kind of take some signs from nature of how does nature rebuild this? In what case would nature come in and help restore this situation? And so in those sorts of circumstances, if you're thinking about the way plants heal after huge changes and huge washings through, I think that you can get some insight from healing that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love looking at how they are in their environment and the way they grow. It's all a kind of a clue to their energy. It's lovely.
Yeah. And there's the kind of moving out of the heart specific area. We could talk about some of the other essences that are really specific for grief. And I think bleeding heart is on both of our lists as a primary grief remedy. Do you have a story that you'd like to talk about bleeding heart? Have you sort of met it in the wild, as it were?
You know what? I haven't met that one in the wild, and I have been wanting to for so long, but I have worked with it and worked with its image a lot. I did some graphic design for someone and went through like hundreds of bleeding heart pictures. And if listeners haven't seen what this looks like, it's pretty amazing in that it looks like little hearts, hanging off of a stem. That's what it looks like.
So it's not hard to figure out how it got it.
Right. So yeah, it's definitely a heart chakra strengthener, and it offers unconditional love. And it's particularly used when there's heartbreak or broken heart due to a loss. How do you like to use it?
Yeah, I really think about it being for those intense stages of grief when your heart hurts.
Yeah.
It literally hurts. And the grief is so fresh and so raw. So that's when I really think about bringing in bleeding heart. And I think that it's also really great for working with the wounded child. So
Mhm.
whenever there's a piece of loss that really relates to the child part of you, so when we lose a parent, when we lose a grandparent, or when a child loses something in their life, bleeding heart is a really great go-to essence.
Yeah, and that is so true that grief has absolute physical ramifications. I mean, the chest can physically hurt. There's all sorts of physical aspects to grief. The body it's one of the hardest things that you go through really in life, because it's on all the levels and it's exhausting. It really is. The body and the mind are doing a lot of work. It's work to go through grief and to try to navigate it and walk through it. But as far as that goes, I know, it can really, grief can get lodged in the lungs,
Yes.
as I've recently experienced with bouts of bronchitis right after, this loss of my father. I mean, it's really interesting how that can all correlate. The mind and the body are not separate.
And they never have been. We decided they were, but they are not.
Yeah.
I think that once again, this Chinese medicine angle. Chinese medicine draws a clear correlation between the lungs and grief. And the season of the fall is the season of the lung, and the affiliated emotion is grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally experience feelings of grief when the season starts to turn. And sometimes those can be related to something that I know, and sometimes they're kind of not. But it's just part of that experience of feeling that kind of heavy on the lungs, heavy on the chest sorts of energy. And so I think that's a crucial element to working with grief, to know that that's a thing, that really can become a physical thing, and to start working with essences to help with that. The Yerba Santa is a important essence for that particular constellation of symptoms. And the Flower Essence Society makes that. That's a California native I know, grows up in the hills near me. And it has a quality of helping with whenever the grief gets those situations like the bronchitis or kind of that sticky, heavy lung kind of situation. Is that one that you've used, or do you have?
Yeah. And especially lately. Yeah. The Yerba Santa gets in there and helps, I feel like, break that up, that constriction, that grief constriction, and helps look at the grief that's sort of deeply embedded in there. And maybe a current grief is really tied to an old grief that we haven't completely processed. And that, I think the Yerba Santa helps with that too, kind of uncovering that and gently things that are really internalized and have maybe been repressed for a long time.
That's such a good point, because just because of the culture and a lot of our life experiences, that if we've experienced losses in the past and haven't been supported or had the time or the space to be able to kind of work our way through them, they'll just hang around. They'll wait for you and they'll come up another time. And sometimes they can be stimulated by a new grief experience, and all of a sudden every other experience that you've had that was not possible to process at the time is ready to come up now. And so I think that that's worthwhile to think about, because sometimes the smallest thing can trigger, something that seems fairly inconsequential can trigger a lot of old grief or a lot of connections to those old experiences that didn't have the support that you could handle them and take care of them at the time. I think that's a good point to remember, because it's really it's a complicated and sticky situation, grief. It's not an easy topic, and it's not something that we often get a lot of support around. I know that I've been surprised at how long it takes. You think, culturally, it's that 2-week period where it's like, aren't you done with that yet? And you'll meet people, even months later and they just have no memory of your loss. And
Mhm.
once upon a time, a friend was telling me about, we don't have a physical reminder to people that we're grieving. In Victorian England, they'd wear mourning clothing. They'd wear black for a year, and they'd have special jewelry, and
Yep, that's
there would be
right.
signals to everyone around them that they were in mourning. And it went
Yeah.
on for, I think, a year, and possibly longer. I don't know, but they would have that signal to others. And now it's kind of like you're just supposed to get over it. And it's just not the way it works. And these things can really reverberate. There's a stage where that I think that first 2 weeks, to me, I always think about it, it's almost like having a head injury. You're
Mm.
kind of shocked and numbed usually. And it's really important to be careful when you're driving because you're not really there. And that's just the first phase. And after that actually is when it gets really challenging, and that's when you need more support, not less.
Yeah, you really haven't started processing it in those first couple of weeks. It's shock and survival, you know. So yeah, and we don't know what to say to people when there's a lot of cultural cliches of things that people will say to you. So not only does somebody have to um, be the person in mourning and be going through this, but they're not getting support even from their closest friends and family who are saying things like, "Oh, now they're in peace in heaven," or they're, just all the kinds of things that people say, or the expectations from a spiritual perspective that we shouldn't grieve people because their spirit is in heaven or free, or whatever the belief system is. It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. Yeah, there's a lot of traditions, certainly, that really try to bypass the pain and want
Yeah.
to just get right through that part, because that's the messy, awkward human part, and get right to the elevated spiritual perspective. But you might be able to get there sometimes, but a lot of times you're just going to hurt. And it's just, you really, as somebody who's been on sort of both sides of that equation, I think that the best thing that you can do to help a friend who's grieving is to just be present for them, and just to be able to sort of hold them in a space where they, ask them questions about their beloved, tell them, get them to tell you stories. And being able to talk about the person who's been lost is so healing. It's not something that you can finish in a few weeks. It's wonderful to be able to help hold that person in that regard of, tell me about your parent. Tell me what they did. And if you have a story to share, that's a wonderful thing to offer, rather than the cliche. If you can just really be real and just be present and hold space, you can do a lot of good to help your friend grieving.
Yeah, companioning. I love it.
That is perfect. I need to learn the name of that book from you so that I
Yeah.
can pick it up too. That sounds really, really great.
And I'll put it in the show notes for anyone else who's interested.
Yeah, it's a big thing, and we will all get there someday. It's good to have a little bit of preparedness, even though nothing really prepares you for the experience. But it's you'll find out really who can help when you get through that experience. You'll find
Yeah.
out the people that really you can lean on, and it's been surprising to me, the people that have sort of shown up in my life, and I've been really grateful for them to help me through my experiences.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to bring in rose quartz at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rose quartz, the stone, the gem, and or the essence. Alaskan essences make a beautiful rose quartz essence. And I just feel like I really want to have that in this field right now as we're talking about grief, because it's really soothing to the heart, and it helps to sort of the energetic is almost an undenting of your heart. So when your heart chakra gets a little damaged or bruised, the rose quartz sort of helps to kind of pop it into its natural shape and helps to heal that situation. Have you experienced?
I love that. I just love that. And it's funny because I have various pieces of rose quartz and I have one shaped like a heart, and it's very common to find it shaped like a heart. So that is so perfect the way that you described that.
Well, it's an actual sensation that people have reported when taking that essence. So whenever I put it in a formula, I'll talk about that because it can be a mild sensation to kind of a noticeable sensation. There have been people reported during taking rose quartz where they thought they were having some sort of a episode in the heart. And no, it's a heart healing. It's not a heart attack. So it's just good to know that you could experience a physical sensation around your heart, and to know that the rose quartz can create that and that it's a healing experience. It's a good thing. Yeah, so it's just interesting. I think rhodochrosite is also one that I use quite a lot in this circumstance, and for me that it's the rhodochrosite energy is a little different. It's a little more like soothing an old hurt that wasn't helped. It's very much that when the inner child was crying and no one took care of him or her, to help kind of when nobody noticed that you were in pain, and it kind of helped to hold that space and heal that space.
Yeah. And do you use kunzite as well?
Sure, not as often, but tell me about what you use kunzite for.
Well, it's in that Calling All Angels formula by Alaskan, and I have several pieces of it as well. And, it's got a real beautiful, bright pink color. So I feel like there's a brightening of joy in the heart. And then there's also an angelic connection, spiritual love.
I like you bringing that up because I think that is another phase of working with a grief situation, because all of these things can be operating at all the same time. So bringing some hope and some elevation and some connection to spirit within a formula is incredibly helpful to sort of start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And so kunzite would be totally that. I always think of it as an angelic, and you often use it to ground the essence angelica in a formula, because the gems and the flower essences are working on different levels. A lot of times the gem essences are really getting into almost into the physical realm and grounding these shifts into the physical realm. So angelica, I think of being this really just wonderful elevator, to help you recognize that angels are present in your life.
I don't know if we can not talk about borage.
Oh, we must.
So that's a flower essence that is used a lot for any situation that requires courage, the courageous heart, and really has an affinity with the heart. It helps with sadness and any sense of loss, and just helps give that power and courage to confront these sort of exhausting emotional situations.
My key word for it is stout-heartedness. It's that energy of like, well, this is really hard, but we're going to do it anyways. Come on, team, let's go. It kind of has that. I think of the hobbits when I think of borage, just, them getting together and working together as a team in order to do something really challenging. So I think borage is that energetic of kind of giving your heart a little boost and a little lift, in order to accomplish something. And that accomplishment can be getting through, just helping you get through a tough time, a dark time. I also think of the Yulon magnolia for this particular scenario, which is one of my Flora of Asia essences. And the Yulon has that quality as an herb. The tree, the buds are used as a lung remedy. And so it has a natural affiliation for lung issues, which affiliates to grief. And the essence of the Yulon really gives you that moment of hope, of that ability to breathe in. If you think when you're grieving and your heart is heavy and you tend to slump and your lungs and your chest tend to close and collapse a little bit, and the Yulon helps you to counter that by helping to lift your heart and to open your lungs and to help you breathe in and be inspired. Literally, that inspiration of life, of finding a way to, okay, a fresh approach of working through.
That's interesting. I use a red box eucalyptus, kind of similarly.
How interesting! Tell me about that.
Well, it's really there's just a lot of movement with that. Well, with all the eucalyptus, and herbally, eucalyptus is used for opening the lungs. It's used in steams. It's used in aromatherapy. It's used in teas. And the flower essence, just really, I think what you described with opening that chest, like if you're kind of hunched over and constricted, that that broadening and opening and kind of standing up and then moving, it really gets that energy moving through the body. So if that's a place that's really stuck, I'll in a situation, I'll add eucalyptus.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
One piece that I'd hate to get through this topic without mentioning would be issues of ancestral grief. I think that's something that a lot of people carry with them in your DNA. Who knows where it's stored? But I think that so many of us have so much grief in our histories, in our family histories, and in our lines, that is oftentimes was not possible to process at the time. So many of us had grandparents who were or parents who were impacted by wars, and dislocations and exterminations, and it's just, there's so much grief just buried in our bodies that we picked up and we carried for our ancestors, and we can help to heal our line by helping to work with this grief. And each time we touch in on our own grief, sometimes we're working back in the timeline and working back into the ancestral line. Are you familiar and work with this concept?
Definitely. And for that, I like working with Western red cedar and also Himalayan cedar. With Western red cedar, it helps access those ancestral memories and helps honor our ancestors. So it's used a lot in ancestral work. I really like the Himalayan cedar as well, and that sort of is more of a soul group or spiritual family connection, which brings a sense of security, and I like that when going through grief. It's been used as a temple incense by Tibetan Buddhists, and it has a real calming, meditative quality, a quality of connecting to divinity. In fact, its name is Cedrus deodara, or deodar cedar. It's a divine cedar that grows in the Himalayas, but it's actually amazingly planted all over. I see it in landscaping in California and probably all sorts of other parts of the country. And so I like that it gives a nice grounding, strength, courage, and sense of stability in our soul group. So it gives a feeling that you have a clan or a tribe or whatever you want to call it, of supportive entities that have your back.
Yeah, that's really important. One of the essences that I also think about, and it's not a tight correlation to what you're just saying, but I think sometimes these waves of emotion can kind of wash over us, and sometimes we don't even know where they're coming from. So having that grounded support of the cedars, I think that's a wonderful container. And then maybe we can shift some of that with some cinnabar. Cinnabar as a gem essence is wonderful for helping to kind of, I think of things that are kind of buried and encapsulated and kind of these old toxins. It's a grief that doesn't move, a grief that can't be expressed becomes toxic. And so I kind of think of it along those lines of helping it to move some of these old things that have just not been possible to touch or to process or to work through, that Cinnabar can help to kind of start pulling them out.
I haven't worked with Cinnabar essence, so that's really interesting to hear. Yeah.
It's not one of the sweet, loving ones. It's pretty intense, but it's just the thing. Because we're dealing with, if we're talking about ancestral stuff, it's not light, fluffy stuff. This is not, we're not talking about, holding our inner child here. We're talking about, excavating Indiana Jones style. It can be pretty intense. And I think mustard might actually be an interesting sort of middle ground for helping to shift some of these things. Because I think of mustard whenever something just kind of hits you from behind and all of a sudden you're in this huge funk and you're not even really sure how it happened. You can maybe walk into a room, or you just, it just strikes you out of the blue. And mustard helps to shift that kind of that heavy, sticky, dense sadness, or, this oftentimes termed depression in the descriptions of mustard. But I think it's just that kind of that emotional gunk that sort of just hits you out of the blue, and mustard helps to shift that. If you think about the mustard fields, we have those in California. I'm in the kind of wine area where there's a lot of mustard growing in the fields, and you come upon a field of mustard blooming in February when everything's kind of gray and gloomy and dim, and all of a sudden, boom, you get this huge burst of this sulfur yellow, and it's that energy of just like whoosh,
light, yeah,
of light, exactly, yeah. And you've made friends with mustard as well.
Yeah, I've sat in a field of it and made the essence. And what I've noticed is the way that it grows tall pretty quickly. And in that time of year, it really does give the sense that light is returning, that light will prevail. And then there's this strength about it. I mean, just the seed and the spice used in culinary, I mean, it's a strong spice. There's nothing wimpy about mustard, and it has that sort of strength in faith and confidence, standing tall in community, standing in community. It grows in communities. And I think it also repairs symptoms of like poisoning on the etheric level. So that is something that's interesting to think about. I don't know how to explain that, but that is something that I sort of experienced with it when attuning to it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of these essences have so many different aspects and facets. So there's something there that's speaking to you about that. That'd be a really interesting to do kind of more research, because that sounds a lot like that Cinnabar topic that we were talking about, where it has that kind of peace. And I think that if I were kind of running that through my mind of how I think about it, I have pretty regularly, just when you drive around as an empath, as a sensitive, you can just be moving through life and you can just be picking up on these like grief segments just as you walk down the road. You can be picking up from somebody else, or you could be picking up the energy of what may have happened in the location. And so I wonder if that essence of mustard kind of can help to maybe remedy those little, I don't even know what to call them. They're not things, but they're like little bursts of emotion or energy that you can.
Yeah, it's bringing light, so it's shedding light on where there wasn't light before. And so there's a real sense of hope, I think, that comes with that.
Love it. Yeah, and I think so many essences are like that. So many essences give us that hope. No matter what they do, they are these gifts of nature that offer us a way forward, that offer us the ability to, embrace what is and keep working towards something better. Plants never give up. They just get
Right.
going, right?
And flowers in general, when a plant flowers, there is a sort of a sense of hope that comes from, um, there's that is such a beautiful expression of life that then turns into fruit and seed, and the seed goes into the earth, and then a new plant is born. Like it's just that cycle. And the flowers that have that sort of really light infused, yellowy, golden hue, like the mustard and St. John's wort is another great example. Those really embody that light energy.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, the next step would be of, literally what's next, looking forward. When you're working your way through a grief experience, it's also really useful after you've gone through the first initial really tough stuff to be able to be inspired with, even though there's still more to do, you can find a way into what your next step will be, what's coming up for you. And I think that's one of the pieces that, when I'm creating a grief remedy for someone, it's always nice to give them that guiding light of what could be happening for them. And that could be those angelics that connect you to the spirit kingdom. But also, I think there's some nice things that can be offered. The asters are an interesting group of flowers that they bloom late in the year. They bloom in the fall, it's late summer and fall. And they have that energy of helping something come to completion and helping you connect to what was good about it, and then to move forward after that, even if it's no longer happening, right? So I've made a lavender aster, which really talks to that sort of sense of celebration of a graduation. It's bittersweet having a graduation. It's bittersweet having a going away party, because you're not going to be there anymore, and the situation isn't going to be happening anymore. And a celebration of life is a sad but also beautiful. So in those same ways, that lavender aster can help you connect to, the heartbrokenness, and also, wow, this was really a great experience that I would not have given up for the world. And I know that another maker, David Dalton of Delta Gardens, has a wonderful series of aster essences that are really all about grief. And I think I'd be remiss not mentioning his series, because they're really helpful to help somebody navigate grief.
Yeah, we've both had him as a teacher, and the aster set is really interesting. There's asters I had never heard of, the wood aster, the white aster, etc. So they all have their place in different aspects of the grief process. One that I'd like to just add in there, in that sort of the next step is, really what's happening is someone in grief is developing a new self-identity as they go through the process, because now they're that person without a father or without a mother or without a husband. And so that's an aspect of moving forward, is that new identity. The way you see yourself, it changes. And I think jasmine's a really great support for that, in finding that spark of divinity within oneself, and finding meaning and purpose in life, and providing that support for your new kind of you as you go forward.
That's beautiful. And that's such an important topic to think about, because there's a big hole in your life when something passes, when somebody goes, and you do have to, your form changes to accommodate that space. And I think that you're really right to respect that place of when you're supporting somebody who's grieving, to recognize that there's a lot that's going to change, and a lot of who you are, who you think you are, is going to shift and change to accommodate that. Thanks for sharing that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, there's so many that, I mean, I think we're running out of time to talk about. We might need to do a part 2.
I think we keep finding that to be the case. So I don't think we're going to run out of things to talk about anytime really soon.
No.
So anyone who's listening to this and experiencing a grief, I think that just, the biggest thing is to be kind to yourself, to reach out to people who can help support you. Because like you were saying, Ro, that companioning process, we really need community to help us in this. And the plants can be part of that community for sure, to help. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, you're not alone. Everyone on this planet will lose someone. It's just the way it is. If they haven't yet, it will happen. And we're all kind of learning. We're all in this together as we go. So I think society, it changes slowly. Sometimes it changes fast, but it does change slowly when it comes to things like this, especially in our culture here with, not wanting to talk about the hard stuff, not wanting to face it. And the irony is that everybody's facing it. So, you're not alone, and there are so many people that actually do this work and are happy to walk on the path with you. Flower essence practitioners, anyone in the holistic health industry, pretty much. And there's a lot of great books and supportive websites. So we'll try and list a few of those, but just, remember that you're not alone, and that if you just hold space for yourself in love, you're going to get through it.
That's really beautiful. And I think that's lovely to have some resources for people who are experiencing this. And it's just been beautiful spending this time with you, Ro. I know both of us have this topic close to our hearts, and this is one that really informs the work that we do. Thanks so much.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Bye now.
You've been listening to the Flower Essence Podcast with Urkana Feld and Kathleen Aspens, and we appreciate your interest in connecting with nature on a deeper level. You can find us online at thefloweressencepodcast.com or join us on Facebook and continue the discussion. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and do not diagnose, prescribe, or treat medical conditions. Please consult with your own physician or healthcare practitioner regarding the suggestions and recommendations made by the hosts and guests of the Flower Essence Podcast.